Welcome to our first panel session of the day. And before I hand it over, I just thought, I know, Nick, you like shaking it up a little bit. And I thought, let's bring some energy into the room because I was asked, we haven't had many jokes in this Spectrum Symposium. And, that hearing that hurts, And I was also asked if I have any jokes specifically on clutter. I was thinking about that. I'll have to make room in my brain to think about that a little bit more. I'll save my other ones for later. I think the lack of response is really folks are in the hallway, so I'm just trying to bide some time. Anyway, I think I'll hand it over to you, Nick, for your panel. The topic here is openness, collaboration, and growing the community. And just a quick reminder for folks in the room, please silence your devices. Appreciate that. Thank you very much. And over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Jeremy. I laughed. I thought they were both pretty good. Not as good as Scott Harris's joke at the Spectrum Policy Symposium, though. All right, so good morning, everyone. We're here to talk about openness, collaboration, and growing the community in light of everything we've been talking about here so far at ISART, and particularly in light of the presentation on frictionless reproducibility and on wireless test beds that we saw earlier today. So my name is Nick Lanneman, and I've got the fortune to moderate this panel and share a few thoughts of my own as well. The way we're going to run the panel, this was the charge, if you will, to try to explore openness, open data, open software, open participation in working groups of various kinds. I think, of course, the focus of ISART is around clutter and propagation modeling, but we can talk about these issues of openness, collaboration, and growing the community more broadly. But specifically, we want to come up with some consensus on action items that we can take around propagation and clutter. And so this is what we're going to focus on today. And we've got a great panel with a fantastic set of perspectives. I've been getting to know these folks over the last few weeks, and I'm fortunate to be up here on the stage with them. The process we will take, first of all, these are the panelists, and I will be introducing each one of them and giving them the floor for a few minutes here as we move along. So our overall plan is to take about 5 minutes per panelist for them to go into more details about their perspectives and share what they're thinking, broadly speaking, and then we've got some prepared questions and answers that we've been working on together as a panel. And then we do plan to have a fair amount of time for audience Q&A. And incidentally, if we end up wrapping early and starting lunch early, I'm sure no one will object to that. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and get started. So let me introduce our panel, again, one by one, and we'll give them about 5 minutes each to share some of their initial thoughts. So first of all, to my immediate right, we have Elvira Pierce, who's currently serving as Deputy Director in the Department of Navy Strategic Spectrum Policy and also the Spectrum Relocation Fund Policy Lead. She's been in the Navy for over 20 years in various roles, focusing on spectrum management and policy. Thank you, Elvira. Okay. Take it away.
Can you hear me? Okay, cool. So also I want to plug the fact that I had 20 years of military service in spectrum management. So the big takeaway I want to say is that sharing is difficult, but it's difficult and challenging. But from a Department of the Navy perspective, we go into we know that each band is challenging, so we go into it thinking that, how do we get to yes? I think I said that the other day. We never walk into a room thinking that there's no compromise. I think once technical data is laid out on the table, this is where we roll our sleeves up and begin to come to the real, what are we going to do here? So I think the letter from NTIA was a good story on how we worked out some challenging initiatives for CBRS. So I think we did a really good job on that. Other than that, that's my story.
All right, thank you, Elvira. Next to Elvira is Richard Bernhardt, Board of Directors for the Wind Forum and Senior VP of WISPA. He's co-chair of the 6 gigahertz multi-stakeholder group that was created by the FCC, and he's got over 40 years of experience in spectrum policy. Richard?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I would like to bring the perspective of what it means to share, because those terms shared spectrum and flexible use and working between the lines have different meaning in different locations. We can see today, if you look at the political sphere, the Cantwell bill is being brought forth. And in the Cantwell bill, there's one perspective on what spectrum sharing is. If you go ask the Department of Defense at various levels, you will find several different views on what flexible use and spectrum sharing is. You ask the NTIA or the FCC or other regulatory agencies, they may have a very different idea. And when you turn to industry and operators, they may have a very, very different idea as well. But I think in the end, what it really means is that we have a limited resource, and that limited resource needs to be used to its highest and best potential and to do the things which benefit this country as best as possible. So whether that definition is narrow and is used just simply to represent a sharing between two entities, maybe the military or the government owns some spectrum and they don't use it entirely, so they're going to share it with another entity, a single entity. That might be one definition of sharing. Another definition of sharing might be that there's incumbents in the band who need to be accommodated, and they're using that band for a long time. And they use it for critical use, but they don't use that entire band, and there's opportunities for different uses within the band. So you might have a selection of choices as to where the flexibility of use could happen. That could be another sharing definition. Finally, industry looks at things in terms of different kinds of uses. So while the incumbent might share with whoever can be using the band and might not care so long as the guarantee is that they're protected, the other definition of sharing can be on the lower side, which is the other side. The parties that are using the band share amongst themselves. And as Elvira mentioned in about CBRS is a perfect example. CBRS is an experimental band where we stepped into the lab and we said, what can we do to use up this space that is not being used all the time? And by the way, we're going to have very diverse users in there. We're going to have mobile users. We're going to have fixed users. We're going to have government users. We're going to have people who use very, very little data like IIoT and IoT. We're going to have people who use lots of data. We're going to have people who use it in rural areas. We're going to have people who use it in urban and dense areas. How can we, indoor and outdoor, how can we work with those parameters? So what we hope to do for you today is take a little bit of each of those definitions and look at where data can come from to support each of those approaches and maybe some others on what flexible use or the definition of shared spectrum means. Further demonstrate how collaboration can work, how you can get to yes, how you can get to consensus, utilizing the tools that we have today and looking forward to the tools, technology, and people that we will have in the future, because the workforce is an incredibly important portion of this. We have all week talked about the data and the means of processing it, but the people who will do that and the way in which we will look at it are critically important as well. So I bring you two perspectives today from my vantage point. One is I represent about 750 independent ISPs known as the WISPA or the Wireless Internet Service Providers. I'm with the association that represents them and their suppliers. And on the other hand, from the Wireless Innovation Forum's perspective, who creates standards and specifications to try and make a common ground for all of those types of uses within various bands. And we've done that in CBRS, and we've done it in 6 gigahertz and in other bands. So hopefully with that background, we can work forward towards that.
Thank you, Richard. So you've already seen some more detailed presentation from our next panelist, Cobus van der Merwe. He's the director of the Powder Testbed, the Powder Platform at the University of Utah. He's also a chaired professor and Flux Research Group director in the School of Computing at the University of Utah. One interesting tidbit that I don't think came up earlier is that he actually spent 14 years or more in industry working at AT&T Research. And so I think that makes his academic life very distinctive. He brings a lot of that experience to the table. Cobus, did you want to have any opening remarks?
I'll be brief since I already had half an hour. I think this probably came out in my presentation. I just want to say when we went into this Powder platform, we, and I dare say NSF, didn't realize how hard the spectrum stuff would be. And so to a large degree, our evolving interest in spectrum was need driven because access to spectrum for us as a wireless testbed has undoubtedly been the biggest challenge, right? And so I can give another 30-minute talk on the different challenges. And so that's kind of where we're coming from. And so in that sense, I think we're a very small player in this area, right? It's a little testbed in Salt Lake City, whereas a lot of other stakeholders deal with spectrum at a much larger level. But I do think from an innovation exploration perspective, finding ways for little places like ours to exist is going to be crucial as we move forward in this space.
But I thought you also called it the singularity.
Yeah, but not in writing.
In pursuit of the singularity. All right, very good. All right, and our next panelist is Alan Rosner. Alan is the director of the Spectrum National Security System at the NTIA Office of Spectrum Management. He's responsible for modernizing OSM's information systems, which, as you can imagine, is a pretty important set of responsibilities today. He's got over 20 years of experience with DISA, the Joint Spectrum Center, in engineering and program management as well. So welcome, Alan. Please feel free to make your opening remarks.
Thanks, Nick. I feel very, very fortunate to have had a career where I've had a diverse across different aspects of spectrum. Early on, I worked as a broadcast consultant, made the transition into the Department of Defense, got exposed to a lot of different people that work different aspects of spectrum. And I think it's actually very important and fundamental to what we're trying to do here, because I think it's fundamentally about driving change to occur. One of the reasons that excites me is, and the reason I work in the space that I do, is because I'm very excited by change. I think positive change in any community drives it towards greater efficiency and effectiveness inside of that community. And I think that's what's fundamentally happening here in Spectrum. We're looking to identify new ways and capabilities that allow us to use that the electromagnetic spectrum better through sharing with between commercial and government uses, while still working to protect some of the sensitivities associated with those federal government uses. So it's an area where workforce comes into it because it requires creativity. It requires new blood to come into that workforce with new ideas. And it requires that, we have forums like this to be able to support that exchange of information. And it's called right out in the Spectrum strategy that in one of the first paragraphs, that agencies and private sector users must address these challenges by working together in the best interests of the American people. And I think that's what this is all fundamentally about.
Thanks, Alan. Well said. Well read. All right, let me take a few moments to introduce myself in a little bit more detail. And I want to share a few opening remarks as well. My name, again, is Nick Lanneman. I'm a professor of electrical engineering at the University of Notre Dame. I have zero experience with propagation modeling, and with clutter. Although I will say the tutorial on Monday brought me up to speed quite nicely, so kudos to the ITS folks who put that together. I think we should, and one of the points I'm going to make today is that we should be doing more of that. What I am doing is serving as director for an NSF investment in a national center for spectrum research, and that's called Spectrum X, and I'm going to go ahead and take the opportunity to share a few slides about Spectrum X. Part of what I want to do here is connect some of these themes that were introduced around frictionless reproducibility rather, with some of the things and the mechanisms that I think are going on in the ecosystem that we have today, and connecting those up and maybe cohering them more would be of interest. So if you're not familiar with Spectrum X, we're happy to get you more familiar with Spectrum X. Our Deputy Research Director, Frank Lind, is here. He was on one of the panels yesterday around spectrum management measurements. So Spectrum X is meant to be a convener of academia. We call it an academic hub that's trying to tie into the spectrum ecosystem. We've got 31 member institutions now. We have a mechanism that we can grow the size of the center, engage additional faculty expertise, additional students, build capacity at different universities. We have 12 collaborating organizations. We have 2 different models for collaboration that we've built into Spectrum X. Again, it's funded by NSF, but we want this to become a sustainable public-private partnership to continue doing what we're doing. And so we're really glad to have a number of players in the ecosystem joining on. In particular, NTIA has gotten very involved in collaborating with us. So we're pursuing interdisciplinary research that ideally will translate into policy relevance research that we will hope will have some policy impact. We're organizing ourselves into 3 research communities, which you see here. One of the big themes underlying them is open data, open analyses, open software. So we'll come back to a lot of that. We've got 2 flagship projects that we're planning and spinning up. If you were at Spectrum Week here recently, we talked a lot about that. But these are being driven and planned out by Frank, so we're happy to share more detail there. But one thing that I think is really important is not only collaboration across this network of universities, but collaborating with industry and government agencies. And so I did want to take the opportunity to highlight the fact that we now have fairly robust conversations with subject matter experts on both sides, from NTIA and various member institutions in Spectrum X, talking about sharing models for 5G systems with federal systems, AI and ML for spectrum management, which we're having lots of good conversations with Alan in particular, value-based spectrum management, and also an interference analysis. So this kind of significant investment from NSF has galvanized academia to get more organized and to engage more in the spectrum ecosystem than we have been able to in the past. Much more to focus on translational and maybe even applied research instead of the basic research that NSF has funded in the past. And we're very focused on collaboration and workforce development. So we have a fairly comprehensive plan around workforce development and education. Starting at the middle school level, we have a number of modules that we've developed by teachers, and they're prototyping them in their classrooms. These are actually also being translated into Spanish as we speak. And so these are going to be openly available and posted on our website and distributed through the various professional networks of teachers. We're working on higher education courseware, particularly survey, high-level interdisciplinary surveys. And we're doing that in partnership with the various agencies and companies in the ecosystem to help tell their story. So they're helping tell their story here. And we're really being thoughtful about ways that students can come in and out of these various programs. So we have a number of undergraduate researchers that are involved this summer. And in fact, we could do some brainstorming today about how to influence the projects that they're working on today. One other thing I want to highlight is an idea or a concept that we've been working on with ITS. We call it the Spectrum Core. And the analogy is to create something like the farm system in Major League Baseball. So you have specialized expertise. You have smaller teams, what we would call single A teams, double A teams and triple A teams that get increasingly closer and collaborate directly with some of the industry and agency partners. The idea here is that you would have specialized projects, and that would be coordinated through some sort of central mechanism, some combination of NTIA perhaps and academia. But this in particular, what we feel is lacking to help students be more productive in this general area is more sustainable funding at the universities for the latest and greatest equipment, software, and technical staff that can help students be productive, taking measurements, analyzing data, and the like. We can write lots of grants to do, basic research. We can often get equipment grants, but that staffing, sustainable funding for technical staff is one of the missing pieces that we think would make sense to try to address here. And again, enabling us to build capacity at these different universities throughout our network. The last thing I want to say is that there is a rather sizable community that we're building, starting with NSF granted researchers and university folks, but again, through collaborations. The last 2 years, we've had a big event, a major event called NSF Spectrum Week. This past version of Spectrum Week, we brought together the 3 main programs that are funded around spectrum research by NSF, the SWIFT program, the NRD-Z program. There's actually a typo there, I apologize. And our Spectrum X Center meeting, but we also co-located the event with IEEE DISPAN, which we want to be have as the major flagship conference for spectrum work. The National Spectrum Managers Association decided to co-locate their event with us as well. And then the Wizard Working Group, Interagency Working Group, also scheduled a workshop around the National Spectrum Strategy R&D plan. So this is becoming a fairly sizable event or a platform where we can bring together lots of the parts of the community, much like ISART and other events, to have kind of broader conversations. And so I wanted to paint that backdrop because I'm not sure that everyone here is familiar with that, but I want to tie this in before kicking off some of the discussion with the panelists to this notion of frictionless reproducibility, right? So we heard today that there are 3 main components in the view of Professor Donahoe that are key to creating an ecosystem around frictionless reproducibility. Data, code, but not just code, easily being able to replicate the execution of the code. So that requires code and the environment to be able to execute the code. And then the third piece that he articulates is challenges or competitions. Okay? One thing I want to put out there is that I think there's an ample opportunity for us to implement some of those. We've seen elements of it in the tutorial that we saw on Monday. Many of us engaged in on Monday. I do want us to maybe shift our focus away from challenges per se, because I think there are a number of mechanisms that we have in this community that have actually been fostering progress. Perhaps not as rapid and viral as in machine learning, as Professor Donahoe highlighted, but there are some very important mechanisms that I think we want to spend some more time talking about today. This group has spent a lot of time talking about them, reflecting on them. And so I'm going to highlight them in my opening remarks, and then we're going to transition into some additional feedback from some of the other panelists. So again, instead of just challenges, what are the other mechanisms in addition to data and software that we might be able to use to pull innovation and make progress and make better and better use of spectrum? So the first bullet that I wrote down is standards. So the push to develop the CBRS ecosystem and the standards specifically, I think, was a key mechanism that enabled a lot of progress in recent years. And we're going to talk more about that today. ORAN is another example where I think it's promoting a lot of innovation. There's a mechanism that's creating this. Another bullet is multi-stakeholder studies like the PathSS study, right? We're going back into that. That's an important mechanism for bringing the community together, pulling data out and out of the various stakeholders and up for discussion and so on. Test beds. We heard a little bit about the powder test bed, and Charles mentioned earlier another test bed. NSF has made a fairly sizable investment in test beds under the PAWR, the POWER program, the powder, AirPaw, ARA, and Coliseum test beds. I think another mechanism is centers like Spectrum X. There's another center that's being funded by the Army called Smart Hub. So these bring together various parts of the community and again, really bring academia into the equation. And then the other thing that I don't think we should ignore here as drivers of a lot of innovation are major initiatives and incentives associated with them. So for example, the PCAST report generated a lot of momentum some years ago. The National Spectrum Strategy is generating a lot of momentum. So it's not just challenges, but there are these other mechanisms. And I think what is going to be helpful for us to do here today is to think about these other mechanisms as well, and essentially think like a professor and give ourselves a grade on our openness around participation, data, and software, around our collaborations, and then finally around how we're growing the community, how we're building a workforce. Give ourselves a grade. What's the state of affairs as of today? What have we learned in the recent 10 years or so? And what do we do going forward? So that's kind of the setup for this panel. And so I thought what I would do is start to transition things now and have a little bit of Q&A with the panelists. We will break for some questions before we break for lunch. So with that backdrop, panelists, what is your perspective on openness in the spectrum, specifically around the clutter propagation and spectrum management community? How open do we really need to be able to make progress? What concrete steps can we make in order to move things forward? Alan had some initial thoughts on that.
So thank you, Nick. I believe that that openness is kind of fundamental to achieving the success kind of set forth by the strategy. Sorry, I'm NTIA. I keep referring back to. I'm going to get in trouble for this. I call it the Book of Derek. So the National Spectrum Strategy, because there's a lot of well captured information in here that is helping drive that openness. I don't believe that technology-wise we can be successful or as successful in a closed environment. And so when we try to drive change to occur, it behooves us from a government perspective to seek input from as wide a variety of sources as possible, and to do a number of other things, to include ensuring that we resource that change as well where it's necessary. So to support organizations like Spectrum X in terms of conducting research or other avenues to be able to ensure that there's open collaboration, wide open collaboration across the community. I think we're doing well. We're improving. If I had to give it a grade, I might say, we give ourselves a C in a sense. We're still coming out of COVID, right? It's good that we're coming back and having conferences and meetings to exchange information. But I think that has great opportunity to improve as well as we move forward. And so I think that in order to achieve success and identify where those opportunities are, that openness has to expand. And we look to the community to give us a lot of those ideas and where we can help. That's why we come to these meetings and conferences to talk to you and get the inputs on how we can improve things going forward. Those are my thoughts.
Did you want to talk about openness and data at this point, or you want to hold on that?
No, I know data it can be a challenge. I've heard of a number of areas where openness and data ends up being a challenge. One is is an area I work closely with, which is the protection of the information that we house for federal government agencies. Everybody would love to have access to that. However, there are certain sensitivities with some of that information with regards to protecting our national security. And we don't want to take risks associated with that. And plus, it is the mission of those federal agencies to identify how that information should be protected. And our job as NTIA to ensure that information is protected that way. So it comes in a balance, though, because there's a lot of information which is still available and open, or that we can provide and aggregate in such a way that it can be available to a community to better understand. We look to do that as we move forward with the band studies under the National Spectrum Strategy, we are, as the strategy says, the implementation plan identifies, we're going to have a multi-stakeholder type environment similar to the past environment to be able to have input from a variety of sources in terms of supporting that. But I think there's a number of other challenges there too with regards to data. We've heard that, some of the commercial companies don't like, exposing obviously what their coverage looks like. It can affect them from a marketing perspective. And one area we should consider is legal approaches for protecting data and information when we share it under certain conditions. So I think some of those have been successful in the past. I think that what we have done or what we are doing is slowly kind of wading into some of these areas and increasing confidence as we go. But that's all part of the steps that I think the community needs to take to get there. Is tomorrow better than today? Yes, right? And as long as we're moving in that direction, I think we're doing the right thing.
Thanks, Alan. So you talked about data, openness in data. I think another important piece is openness and participation in these various organizational working groups and the like. So I think some of the other panelists have some thoughts on the CBRS working groups and also the PathSS working group. Anybody want to jump in?
I think the collaboration with PASS and also with CBRS has come a long way. PASS has allowed academia to be in the room, so you get that perspective. You have the multi-stakeholders and they're in the room, so we've learned to work out ideas and maybe possible sharing arrangements in the early stages. And I think I wouldn't give it I want to give it a B in the whole process because I try to say we're doing great strides. And in the sharing, there's a lot of sharing that goes on within the working groups. Once the band is sold and you're in now we have to see how to get through the coordination process. So there's a lot of leadway there to be open and sharing your technical parameters or technical perspectives on how you can get to coexistence. So I view that as I can't say a C. I want to give it a B minus.
So, students always, as you know, once you give a grade, a student will always ask, well, why did I get a B, professor? So do you have any thoughts on exactly where, what are the gaps in terms of open participation, open data, open software, right? Where are the gaps in terms of getting an A in your mind?
Okay, so I think we all come to the table trying to protect our assets. So you come in cautiously. So, and I think during the whole coordination process, it's a race when it doesn't necessarily have to be a race. If you take your time, be a little cautious, you're going to get to a compromise that's mutually beneficial.
One thing I've been impressed by is that the door is not closed to anyone in these working groups, right? I mean, whether you're from industry, from federal agencies, or academia, you can participate, but there can be barriers. And I'll just go ahead and put out there, maybe Cobus will want to mention as well, from an academics perspective, without the funding to justify the time on a given project, we're going to, our time and our energy tends to follow the research funding. And so getting sponsors to endorse academic, when we don't have a vested interest in a particular system, it may be that we need to have some other mechanisms to encourage more participation in these venues.
Can I add one more thing? Because I was very impressed that you had a Spectrum Week in my backyard and I had no idea. So I don't know how you promoted that.
Let's work on that. Let's
work on that,
shall we?
I mean, that would have been cool to try to get some, people from the office out there.
Richard, Cobus, you want to jump in on openness?
Yeah. I think if I'm giving a grade, I'm giving a C. And the reason I'm giving a C is I don't think we are where we were maybe a few years back where everybody stands in their own corner and refuses to come out of that corner. But we are in our own independent silos, and those silos do not cross over very well. Academia is in a corner. Industry is in a corner. Regulatory government is in a corner. Users are in a corner. And I think if we're going to really charge towards openness and cooperation, there needs to be greater education, greater commonality between the parties, understanding the commonality between the various silo entries, and also the understanding of the benefits and downsides of sharing not only data, but use cases and approaches, even technology and personalities. The last one is not one that we typically throw into science, but this is, as I've learned over some 40 years in the telecom industry, the people business. And if it's going to be a people business and you're going to walk into a room and you're going to share something that might affect your business or your industry or your department, you need to have some degree of trust. And in order to get that degree of trust, you got to share, give up a little to get a little. So I think the C is the midline, for which really I don't see us going the opposite direction into the D or F territory. I see us moving up, but that requires some effort to compare some notes to better understand the other parties that are in the room and understand that there's also that greater good category that isn't any one of our parties. That by sharing data, especially in a data intensive time, that we will probably get things which will benefit all of us, maybe in a greater way than ever before, and use that to benefit each of us. And so for me, I think the old co-opetition term is where we should be. We do compete, but we're also close. We need to cooperate. And I come from a community of small and medium-sized operators that work at the edge of stability. They start out as small businesses, and as all small businesses start out, they're weak. They don't have the same sort of strength and capacity and backing of a large organization. So where can they get some of that strength and that cooperation? They look among other operators that operate in a similar space, either to learn how to do the business or to combine resources in order to become more strength intensive. That is where we have to be. We have to be willing to understand that for the greater good, and even for our own industry, pulling together those resources that won't threaten us, maybe it threatens us a little bit, we'll do a lot for the greater good. So we'll start out with a C, and I hope we head up from there.
I think I would agree with that assessment. The way I would think of the grading, just to start with that, is aspirationally an A, operationally a C. And what I mean with that is, we at events like the NSF Spectrum Week, we have people from all over the ecosystem standing up and say, yep, sharing is good, openness is good, just not with my data or my spectrum or my whatever the resource is, right? And I think that's a little bit our experience. And, I have anecdotes there in terms of the data. So as Nick said, I cut my teeth at AT&T Labs Research. I still work with those folks. And I kind of understand the mindset of an AT&T of saying, well, what's the incentive? Why do I want to share my data? So we have this anecdote here. We have this spectrum-related project with folks from AT&T, but they're not providing us any of their good data because for all the reasons that were discussed yesterday. So we're in this position where, my students go out and they do measurements, and we kind of second guess a lot of the stuff that they are unable to share with us. And then we bring that to the collaboration. I'm like, this is wrong. I understand why we're doing it like that, but this is a little suboptimal, So two more things. I think I want to react to the open standards, right? And I think there's a tension there, right? I think in your Open RAN example, I think is a nice one to think about. And of course, I look at this as an academic. I want to be able to have my students do innovative things and change things. Right? And so there's a little bit of tension there in terms of standards. So I like sort of open frameworks. Right? And so it's why the Open RAN ecosystem or framework is something that resonates with me, because there's clearly standards, right? So sort of the east-west, I think, you got to standardize that, because otherwise there's nothing working. But if you look at the north-south interface, well, that can be pretty open, and that's where you can innovate, right? And so I think that sort of tension in terms of coming up with standards, but at the same time enabling innovation in an open ecosystem is, I think, at least again from my perspective, critical. I think the other thing, and I think Richard touched on this, I think understanding the other side and where they're coming from is critical, right? I think, and so I think like events like this, I think I would also, in my more narrow perspective, in the NRDZ work that we've done, they were very intentional about having these workshops, or what do they call them? Lean coffee hours, where different participants would come and interact with each other, right? And when we started going to that, there were all these passive radio users, and I'm like, why would I want to share with them, right? I mean, there's a radio telescope out in the middle of nowhere. And I'm now at the point where, oh, right, I need to worry about them, because their spectrum use is being threatened by active users, right? And so, I mean, this is a little small example, but that sort of understanding of the other and getting to the point where I at least understand what their concerns are is, I think, critical, right? And I think this comes back to some of the discussions we had yesterday about incentives, right? If I don't address anything you care about in you sharing your data with me, why would you share it with me, right? And so I get that, and I think that sort of idea of understanding the other, again, just to put a label on it, is I think pretty critical.
Let me do a little bit of a plug for the Powder platform here. I think you should give yourself a little bit of a higher grade, at least in terms of maybe even a B, in terms of enabling, literally anyone to sign up and access the resources that you have deployed. And the fact that I can log into the Powder test bed and, design an experiment with a couple of base station-like devices and some mobile devices on Salt Lake City buses. The fact that I can reuse a lot of software that's already been developed, tested. I think that there's a lot there that the community needs to be more aware of and lean into and take more advantage of and help you evolve that platform. So,
sorry, you didn't make it clear I was grading myself.
well, but
I thought we were grading the broader ecosystem.
we are grading the broader ecosystem, but the broader ecosystem may not be sufficiently aware of the Powder test bed. That maybe we're farther along than we realize, right? But we have to utilize the tools. All right. I did want to actually pull on a thread, though, Cobus. If there's anyone that's going to be open with their data and their software, you would think it would be the academics, and especially given the capabilities that your platform has enabled. So I'm curious to see, in your experience, is our community, are the academics and the other researchers that are using Powder as a platform, are you seeing a trend that there is a tendency to make more data available, to make more of these profiles or code available?
I think the tendency would be too strong. I think there's movement in that direction. And, again, I think that comes from NSF. Again, that's where the money is coming from for most academics. NSF emphasizing the need to do that, emphasizing the importance of releasing data sets. So I think that's helping. I do think, though, as a community, and I come out of the not wireless networking systems community, and if you look at those, the sort of top tier conferences, excuse me, in that area, they're much further along in terms of expecting experimental results, expecting repeatability. They typically in their conferences they have these, they have a separate chair for artifact evaluation. This is a pretty big deal, right? And they recognize that, and they give awards for that. And I think, I had the example in my slides of the Mahesh Marina with their work at Mobicom. So it's moving in that direction, but I don't think we're there yet, right? I think there's more of a, I don't know, education, pushing or nudging is maybe the right word, the community in that direction to say, yeah, it's actually really hard to do this in a real experiment. So let's give credit for that. And let's recognize that as a real contribution. So yeah, I think we're moving in that direction, but I don't think we're there yet.
One idea that occurred to me in listening to Donahoe's talk was that maybe you could create a leaderboard on the Powder platform for the profile that is being used most heavily, right?
That's an idea.
So a ranking of the profiles that are getting used broadly in the community, it would encourage, new researchers to come try them out, perhaps. Anyway, so again, first part of the panel discussion here around openness and participation in these various working groups, both in the past and going forward, data and software. Any other reflections, grades, constructive feedback on the openness component of our panel?
I'd just like to caveat my grade, since I gave the first one as a C, and I can't help it. As I get older, I tell stories, right? So this probably is a story that, we all heard when we were younger and in college. I had a professor that came in on day one, said, he says, no matter how hard you work or how well you do, 60% of you are going to get a C. Another, whatever it is, 30%, are going to get B's, and a small 10% of you are going to get A's. No matter how hard you work or how well you try. That was my control systems professor. To us, that was kind of largely about there's always an opportunity for expansion and learning, and that there's always something that can be improved. And I initially said, well, give where we are a C. That's mostly about the opportunities that we have to improve going forward. If we were kind of at the A level from a community perspective, we might be boring, right? We might be doing a lot of things and get stuff done, but we might be kind of boring. So I love change. I love to see opportunities occur. I love to find where those new opportunities might be. So that's kind of the basis for why I said that.
Can I also add, I think even me saying a B, I feel like you still have the opportunity to go up. So I'm looking at it in a positive way that we're moving, I think, pretty quickly. Since COVID, I think COVID slowed us down, and then we figured out ways to use technologies to share through paths, through it just, you weren't in the room. I think you have better energy when you're in the room and sharing ideas via a Teams meeting, and things of that matter. But I stand by my B.
Well, I'm going to be so bold as to give us a B plus. All right. So, and let me tell you why. So again, we just heard the announcement of CBRS 2.0. Right? That was a fairly open, multi-stakeholder process in both versions. PathSS is being rebooted. We have the National Spectrum Strategy. I can literally go to the Powder test bed and deploy a 5G stack that's based on open source software. I can take measurements. In principle, I can save data and make my data available. I think, if anything, the data sharing is the weakest link at this point. Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of lessons learned that openness has contributed to progress. I know I'm excited about it. I see a lot of people in Spectrum X excited about it. So I think we should. I understand, the C grades and even Elvira's B grade, but I'm going to be a little more generous. Maybe grade inflation. I've been spoiled at my, very expensive private institution, but I'm thinking B plus on the openness front, particularly because of all the participation. That's really wide open now. All right, let's transition a little bit into the collaboration space. So again, this notion of being able to work together, being able to build off of each other's contributions, being able to move things forward, building consensus is all part of the collaboration process. I want to get more insights out of the panel in terms of their perspectives on where we're at with collaboration. Again, if you want to simplify it to the grade and why, that's welcome here. But I thought maybe we would start it off again, focusing specifically on entities like the National Spectrum Consortium, like the CBRS and the Wind Forum and the working group, the working groups that it has run, and the Path SS study. What's our assessment of collaboration? How are we doing, and how do we continue to improve? I think Richard was going to kick us off with that.
Yeah. I started with Wind Forum about 9 years ago, right around the time that CBRS was starting this process, working into how can we come up with a baseline set of standards for CBRS. And you have to understand that there was a group of people, my people, and especially, although it involved utilities and other entities as well, that had to be displaced in order to take CBRS. The 3.65 to 3.7 band was already a lightly licensed band in full operation at that point. And so when the concept of CBRS was starting to be passed around, those people felt very threatened because the band that they were using was about to be changed. So what ultimately happened with that band was it became integrated into the CBRS band, and the Part 90 version disappeared and the Part 96 version came up, but they still were displaced out of their band and moved into CBRS. You also had a stack of manufacturers who were looking at, should we participate in this ecosystem? Because every band that's created has to have its infrastructure ecosystem there, or you can talk about a band all you want. If you don't have equipment, you don't go anywhere. So that's another group that was in that multi-stakeholder group. The way we determined that CBRS should work was we needed to have a controller, a spectrum access system to be in the middle. So we needed a group of people who could run organizations, could serve as administrators, that would know how to work with all the different stakeholders that might use CBRS. We had regulatory, the FCC in setting up Part 96, the interests of the federal government through the military, in the interests of protecting the incumbents. So in order to get to collaboration, in order to get to consensus, you had to pull all those parties' interests together in a very contrary environment. Many parties did not have the incentive to make this project. The incumbents who already had their license didn't want to give up their license. The government, well, it controlled that spectrum, didn't want to give up that spectrum. The manufacturers are looking at a more complex, more unknown shared spectrum. Is it worth the investment? Are we going to put money into it to make it happen? And then it's no good to have shared spectrum, whether you have all of those interests covered and the incumbents and everybody else, if nobody uses it. So you have to have the users, the clients of that, those people who will use the band to deliver either commercially or for whatever reason they're going to use the band. So how do you pull together a group like that? You have to identify first off that there's a national interest, there's a local interest, and there's an individual interest in everybody doing this. If they don't see that, there will not be a consensus. The other thing is that like most things in life, you can't take the whole and try and slam it down everybody's throat. I have worked in consensus-oriented standards for more than 20 years, and if you start with the whole thing, you don't get anywhere. So what we did was we broke it down by the various pieces. We looked at what a SAS would do. We looked at what a CBSD would do. We looked at what a category A device would do indoors. We looked at what a category B device would do outdoors. We looked at where the interests were for mobile operators and where the interests were for fixed operators and what kinds of technologies might be used in these things, because that was relevant to the manufacturers. And what might the market be, and what might the use be, and what might be the way in which this could expand into other bands eventually. All things of interest, different parties in different ways. And we created committees that studied each one of those things and worked within each one of those things until we could get at least some degree of agreement. Yeah, we really want a new band. Yeah, we really want it to be able to serve a certain kind of clientele or maybe a mix of clientele. We think it should be in smaller size than the larger ones that were done licensing. And believe me, that's not how it started out. The parties out, like the MNOs and other parties, felt this should be a licensed band, and it should be one that goes much like the licensed bands that are nationwide. So you start off with a very basic tenet. Some people want it small, some people want it large. Some want high power, some want low power, some want regional, some want single use, some want all uses and all technologies. But if you can break it down into smaller parts, you can come to agreement within each one of those things. It didn't go fast. It took us a long time. It took us a bunch of years. And Elvira mentioned coexistence. You can get to a state where you have other people using and cooperating in a band, but can they get along with one another? Can they cooperate? Can they live in the same sandbox? That's the other side of the coin. Even if you solve for all of the things that you want to solve for all these groups, if you have multiple uses operating in the same space, can they get along? Can they actually make this work? And that was a very difficult thing to do. In the end, over a number of years, and with some pretty stringent requirements to meet to protect the incumbents, we were able to do so. And we were able to do so from multiple committees that looked at multiple sides. We had to test and verify that this would work. We had to have protocols that would work. We had to have specifications that people could commonly follow, that met the regulations, and we were able to do that. We had to have it set up so that there was security and profiles that could be entered into the system. We had to create what the SASs would do. And if you look at CBRS today, we're not done. We're 4 years into the live process of this. We have 400,000, maybe 500,000 operators in the system now, which is pretty darn good. But especially with the observation of the parties that were working together, the incumbents and the SASs, looking at the protection areas that were in there and realizing at first we didn't know what we were doing. We needed to protect as best as possible. So we used the ultimate protections that we could use rather than the most efficient protections that we could use. So yesterday, the NTIA, in combination with the SASs, in combination with an address to the FCC, in combination with the operators and Wind Forum and other parties, came out with a revision saying we now have 4 years of data, very good data. And that data shows us we can relax some places, take down some of the protections, and still be fully protected. And that is going to invite more uses and more dynamic trust in CBRS. And that was done because we were able to collaborate with a party that maybe didn't want to collaborate with us originally and is collaborating now. They now have the foresight to see it in other bands where they occupy a portion of it for shared spectrum. We see it as a way that the CBRS can expand and provide greater coverage and more reliability and predictability. So on that front, I think we have a whole lot of success in that model. And I would love to see that model applied going forward to many, many other bands, especially those in the national spectrum strategy, so that we can get the highest and best uses in each of these bands.
Thank you, Richard. So I'm going to infer an A on CBRS.
I'll give it a B plus.
Wow, he's tough.
I'm a tough
He's that
grader.
professor, right? Anyone else want to jump in on CBRS?
I'll jump in. Maybe I grade too soft. I don't know, but I think CBRS is a good baseline on how we could share. We've had, and I got lots of little the great things we've done, plus the letter that came out to show that we can get into a room and at times leave personalities at bay and work and figure out what are we here for. We're here to coexist. We don't have to love each other. I mean, I'm from two sides. There's the side that's Elvira. When I'm home, I want all those whiz bang things that industry can provide in a particular band. And then when I'm at work, there's the other side. So I have to balance both sides within any band. But CBRS has done a lot of things, and I think it was more of when we got into the room. That's when you rolled up your sleeve and the ground truth came into the room. And I think each and every time we came into that space with what can we do? We can't leave here and everyone is equally unhappy. So we recognize that we have to share in some way, shape, or form. And I'm excited about how we're going to get to this dynamic spectrum access. So that should lead into some promising areas where we can improve on sharing. And I still give it an A.
Well, that's a great segue. Did you want to add any more commentary around collaboration in the PathSS work?
Yeah, I sit in that group, and I think what we've done with having academia in the room, industry in the room, and writing from ground zero on different technical aspects, whether it's a feasibility study or like we're trying to do within the I'll say baseline, just coming up with what does the dynamic spectrum access mean so that we can work toward it. Because right now, I don't think we have a real definition. Everyone has said little parts, but what is the official definition of dynamic spectrum access? So within the past meeting I was in, we talked about that one for like 45 minutes. And I didn't think it should have been that hard, but so that's one of the things. I think it's a good collaboration working group because you get all sides and everyone is equally heard.
So it's too early in the semester for a grade, is what I think I just heard.
On paths?
Yeah, I mean, there's
In the past, I would. Here I go again. You know, I'm not going to give anybody a C because you're trying. So I think paths has shown to be a great forum for collaboration. So I'm going to give it an A.
Wow. So PathSS 1.0 gets an A from Elvira.
Yeah.
Awesome. And it's early in the semester on PathSS 2. Richard.
So we've done assessment at WinForum. We've done assessment after assessment after assessment of, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? See lessons learned in RS. And that a lot of that was carried over into PAS because we passed that data over for that assessment. And I think perhaps the one thing that comes out of, especially when you create standards with a technical group of people, is the complexity of what you do versus the simplicity of what might be able to be done. I think we did a darn good job at getting to consensus. We did a darn good job of creating a model that had never been used before and now can be replicated. But we didn't do such a good job at making it simple. And I think that is the area where improvement can happen. And I think moving forward into new models where we bring in a lot of data and where we look at even more complex incumbent situations, maybe 3.1 to 3.4.5, maybe 6 and 7, maybe whatever the band is, where there's complex mixes of operator and users that are in the band and those that want to use the band, that we try our very best to make it as simple as possible to achieve the purpose. Sometimes there's a need for complexity. Sometimes there is a use for all of the acronyms. But sometimes you can make it and take a look back and say, I could have done this a lot simpler. Let's make some improvement.
I think that feedback would apply to the 3GPP bodies as well, but talk about acronym soup. Collaboration, any thoughts or comments from Alan or Cobus?
I want to maybe just quickly comment on the CBRS, and of course I've not been involved in that, but from my perspective, I mean, everyone hails it as an enormous success, right? And I think, I mean, I've not heard anyone say anything about CBRS other than, look, it's working. And I think, I mean, I get where you're coming from in terms of, well, the things might have been more complex, but I think the fact, more simple, sorry. But I think the fact that you're adapting to that, I mean, isn't that the way we learn, right? So as we learn, we have more data, and now we can do better. So I think, from my perspective, right, I think if CBRS was not a success, nothing else in spectrum sharing would have happened, right? Or it would have been a lot harder, let me say. And so I think, from my perspective, looked like an astounding success. I have a question. Richard, one of the things that you said, and this sort of ties in with the collaboration, but I'll phrase it a little bit differently, is that it took time to get there, right? And so as I look forward, will we be able to compress that time? Or, you know, and I'm thinking of this sort of a little bit in the context of the National Spectrum Strategy, where there are aggressive times, right? So will we be able to repeat the process at more aggressive timescales? And I don't want to be controversial, but that was sort of, as you said, that's like, yeah, this was a difficult process and it took a long time to get there. And we're saying, well, let's try to repeat this process going forward. So do those two things match is maybe my question.
Well, not exactly, but let's just take CBRS and 6 gigahertz. Now, they're not identical sharing paradigms, because in the paradigm of 6 gigahertz, there's no government entity. But there is complex, sensitive point-to-point links in 6 gigahertz, ones that run nuclear power plants and utilities and financial sector locations. Destroying or interfering with those can have some of the same kinds of ripple effects that interfering with a spin 43 radar system on the CBRS side might have. Maybe different end users, but same complexity. If you look at the time it took us from PCAST to move forward to the actual first round of specifications and adoption and acceptance by the FCC and testing and certifying SASs and devices, it was roughly, 6 or 7 years to do that. If you look at 6 gigahertz from the initiation of that process, it was about 3.5 to 4 years. And as we move forward, we have what we had before to look at and to compare to. And we have data sets and test beds for which we can compare, contrast, and apply data to see if it's going to work. No two bands are identical. No two sets of incumbents are the same. Variables are different. The same way we looked at clutter all this week. Clutter changes. Sometimes it's trees. Sometimes it's poles. Sometimes it's weather. Sometimes it's terrain. Sometimes it's something different from minute to minute. Sometimes it's static all the time. So those things are variables that we have to identify up front when we're looking at each new approach to this. But we do now have some experience, where before we really didn't have a lot of experience. Some might argue TV white space was the first foray into that. And there's something to be learned from that. Other countries have some paradigms of sharing, but I think CBRS was the first complex, full, tri-series, tri-level approach, very, very in-depth, where there were very, very different parties involved. And we were able to achieve an operating system with many, many people using that system now. So I do believe we can compress those, and we can compress them more as we move down, doing more of them. We have to be cognizant of not compressing them too much so we make mistakes because they're costly.
So I would say we can't fear the schedule, right? If we have to proceed in order to succeed, right? So if we run into issues, those are things that we can address and deal with as we go forward. But I think that successes of the past, like CBRS, need to turn into the successes for the future as well. And we shouldn't be worried about the time frame that has been kind of laid out for us. We try to manage to it and try to put in place what's needed to help support that. But I think that we got to see that as an opportunity. While we're handing out grades, I want to be clear that a lot of these individual efforts have all been kind of identified as good successes. CBRS, PASS, all the Spectrum X work, the work through the National Spectrum Consortium. Inside of NTA, we have an innovation fund, CSMAC. All of these efforts, I think, are building towards kind of towards future successes. And from an NTIA perspective, we only want to expand on that. If you see in the Spectrum Strategy Implementation Plan, we want to take advantage of those things that have worked in the past and expand on them for the future. The band studies will have kind of a multi-stakeholder environment associated with those as they go forward as well. So let's look back and say, well, what's working, right? And make it work even better in the future as we go forward.
Thanks, Alan. Well, so we've got about 10-ish, 15 minutes or so left in our panel. We do want to engage the audience in some point, but we have a broad scope. And so I want to give the panelists an opportunity to talk about growing the community, the third part of our topic for the panel, workforce development, right? I've mentioned already a couple of the ideas and the programs that we're working on in Spectrum X. I'm happy to talk more about those during the break. What I really want to hear is from this set of panelists and from the audience, what do we need in terms of workforce development? Where are we at? How big does this spectrum workforce, propagation workforce need to be? And how do we get there?
I'll start off.
Have at it. Just don't take the whole time because we do want to engage the audience, Richard.
I'll make it short and sweet. The National Spectrum Strategy and the IIJA, the infrastructure bill, both look at serving the unserved and serving the underserved to make ubiquitous service in the United States for broadband and services associated. To be ubiquitous, to have all of those things done, a lot of money is being put out on the table. A lot of effort is being made. All of the states are involved in this. All of the territories, even some of the very small ones, are involved in this process. We have many, many funding programs out there for achieving these purposes. The one thing we don't have is adequate personnel to achieve this. We are going to be in hyperdrive over the next few years as all of this money hits the ground to try and fill in the gaps and make America competitive as it can be, having ubiquitous broadband and telecommunication services. To do that and to look at the variables that we've talked about all week here, looking at the most and best ways to look at clutter, propagate best, hit those places with the services we need. We need an enormous trained workforce. We need the connection between our academic institutions and our industrial institutions, are the ones providing the services. We need them to be able to train wise for the employees that they're going to need for the next 10, 20 years. That is a gap that I believe we have right now, and we need to be able to make that as easy as possible for those two parties to get along and to develop a workforce that's necessary.
Next, so NTIA, again, I'm going back to the Spectrum Strategy. Under Pillar 4, objective kind of 4.1 of the Spectrum Strategy, NTIA is going to be working with the National Science Foundation on a national spectrum workforce plan that kind of lays out what those needs and requirements across the entire community. It's got to take a broad look at the entire community to understand what the needs of the workforce are. I say this all the time internally as a manager. We're nothing, without our staff and employees. They are everything to us. We're the ones that stand up here and summarize things and say things like that. But they are everything to accomplishing the mission and getting things done, and ensuring that we continue to have an engaged workforce that has opportunities that excite them across that workforce is fundamentally important to keeping the whole engine of this community going. So we'll be taking a hard look at it as part of the work that we're doing under the Spectrum Strategy, and hopefully that will serve as a basis to drive change and support the community and nurture it for the future going forward.
I can maybe key off of that. And again, I come at this from the perspective of this test bed that we're running. We over the 5 years that we have been running it, we've been, lessons learned. It's hard to use. People don't have the cross-disciplinary training and so on and so forth. And we've also done a whole bunch of tutorials and in-person training in Salt Lake City. And so one of the things that I'm really excited about, we recently proposed to an NSF cyber training program, and it looks like we might get the funding. It's not official yet, but we're at the NSF is asking about dates things, so it looks quite positive. And so we're going to take all of the lessons learned from our trying to do training so far into that program, and this is still in the future, but the idea there is to say let's try to do a cohort, and the specific target of this training would be graduate students, right? So graduate student training, but to form a cohort where we would basically start with virtual training, right? So have them do sessions over an extended period of time, and then kind of culminate in a week worth of in-person training in Salt Lake City at the University of Utah. And again, it's based, we've done these week-long trainings before, but the students show up and, there's a big disparity in terms of their skill sets, and you're pounding them with information, and it's just too much, right? And so we're trying to get to this, let's get them all at some base level, and then let's do the heavy stuff, or do the heavy stuff in the context of their specific research. And again, we're focused here on graduate student training. So that's something we're very excited about. And I think is, of course, something that we're engaged with Spectrum X on that as part of their curriculum development. There's a curriculum development aspect to our plans as well. So yeah, that's something we're quite excited about doing.
Okay, can I jump in?
Please.
Okay, so I think one thing that's very important is the internships, and they need to be paid because people's time is worth money. And I think the exposure from that level will make the individuals that participate in those type of programs hungry for more. And we have to grow. I know I'm aged now, but we have to grow our next set of leaders in Spectrum, and that's one way. I know Navy is starting to entertain the idea of how can we have an internship, because right now we don't at our office, and then how do we fund it and make it again attractive and get the word out through social media that we're starting. We're working in that arena.
Any thoughts on the size of the workforce that we need? Or do we not go there for now? It's a hard problem. NASA's been working on it.
I mean, to put a number to it, seems, maybe not the right approach, right? It should scale to what's needed to meet the requirements, my perspective, right? Ultimately, keep in mind what we're doing here is spectrum is a resource issue, right? And we are striving to use that resource more efficiently and effectively given its value. And the workforce should expand to whatever that requirement is.
So you actually expect, even if we set that number, it's probably going to grow because of the complexity of all
Well,
of this.
because of the value of the resource.
Yeah. Real quick logistical check. Are all the panelists going to be sticking around for lunch? Anybody have
Yes.
to take it? Okay. So with that being said, I'm going to check in with Jeremy. How much time do you want to give us for some audience Q&A before we transition to lunch?
Well, we started 5 minutes late.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and 7, 8 minutes.
Okay. Well, so we went a little longer than we had planned, but let's see if anyone in the audience wants to raise comments or questions or give grades on the various dimensions.
We got a quick question.
Fire away.
Quick question.
We got one quickly.
Pardon?
One quickly. That could be good or bad.
What grade would you give on progress towards reaching consensus on clutter? Specifically clutter. We talked about a lot of things, programs. How about clutter?
Not being a spectrum expert, a clutter expert, I'm not going to provide a grade. I don't feel qualified to provide a grade
I
here.
was going to say the same. That's the other panel.
I'm grading. I'm like the professor who wasn't in class. It was all taught by TAs, right? So you definitely get a B, right? Or but given that you drove a whole conference, I think that maybe that's an A too. Kudos to everybody that was involved in all of that effort.
And I just note that we called this in pursuit of, not achieving.
I will say I think that the ITS tutorial on Monday deserves an A.
I agree.
I think that was great stuff. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. Maybe A plus. Maybe A plus. Other comments or questions from the audience? Or grades?
Do we have any questions online? Oh, you got. Oh. Here's somebody familiar with them.
I don't know if you know me, I'm Billy Kozma from ITS. I do actually have a question, and Kobus actually touched on this at one point, but I wanted to ask it then, but I didn't want to interrupt. Is on the data sharing and openness, whether it's data or software, how do we do a better job of incentivizing it? So I'm obviously in a government research lab, but it's always a question of, if I write a paper, there's clear metrics as to gauge its impact, cite the paper, understand kind of how it influences the community. If we publish data, we publish code, it's something we struggle with. What is the impact of that to the larger goals? Because, at the end of the day, most of us work in a zero-sum environment with respect to resources. And so understanding, acknowledging work that's been done just publishing data or something is really important to help justify, right? Max really stood up that tutorial and it's great. If you ask me later in this, what's the impact of keeping something like that alive so that people anytime can go on and use? How do we quantify that better and acknowledge that to the community? Because I think that would help incentivize. So there's kind of a little bit of a broad question there, but I'm curious on the take of that. Thanks.
I can maybe start with that. And I think, like I said, I cut my teeth at AT&T research, and they had this notion of, well, some people do stuff that's useful for the business and other people do more researchy stuff. And we really care about the area under the curve, right? And I think, so I think the first comment is from an organizational perspective, you need the people, the leadership to acknowledge that, well, this is maybe a little bit off, but it is actually contributing to the area under the curve, the big picture. I think the other comment I have is, and I did say something along those lines earlier, just in terms of data sharing, a fruitful path for us have been if you solve or attempt to solve a problem for the data owner, that's incentive, right? Just saying, well, you have the data I need, give it to me, does not cut it. And then I think that the third thing I want to say, and you kind of touched on it, and I mostly just want to agree with you, maintaining these things is hard, right? And so I didn't really say that in my talk, but we kind of distinguish between profiles in our world that we provide and that is maintained because we have staff that can do that. The tricky thing is, and we still encourage our students to do that, is, well, create a profile of your paper. But you know what students do? They move on, right? And now 2 years down the road, someone's coming back and they say, oh, you know, we want to reuse your profile and it's not working. And I'm like, well, you know, the student that did that work is now working somewhere else, right? And that's really tricky. And I think, I don't know how to solve that, I think, but recognizing that that's part of the problem, right? If you put something out there for the community, it requires maintenance to be useful. And how do we get there? And I don't have a good answer, so maybe just agreeing with you.
So there is a role in government leadership to identify, you know, where those successes are, right? And then to ensure that they are kind of resourced for the future as they go forward. So that's actually kind of key, because that process can take a while, becomes very political, obviously gets into, you know, identifying and prioritizing things that need to go forward. But that's key, is kind of identifying where things succeed. Success does drive future resources. It does, fundamentally. You may not see it on a case-by-case basis, but overall, it does drive future resources.
I was just going to jump in with a few observations. I haven't done this myself, but I have observed when it comes to software, when it comes to data, many researchers are encouraged to post those resources as so-called supplemental information into the journals. I think we also saw the term digital artifact. And there is some research that has shown that when you share supplemental information with your paper in the journals and these publications, that it actually leads to much more substantial uptake and citations of your work. So there are incentives related to metrics like citation counts, download counts. If you structure your sharing in such a way that you have a DOI, that you have a request to cite the work in this particular way, provide a nice clean BibTeX citation entry, I think that can help you track metrics of how much that resource is being used, and then perhaps decide how to allocate resources to keep it alive and sustain it, grow it, etc. But exactly what those best practices are, I don't personally know. I've just observed that here and there.
Billy, when we did CBRS, later when we did 6 gigahertz, we tracked everything we did in a traceability matrix. And that traceability matrix had direct lines to data, because you can't test something you don't know what you're looking at. Now, if you try and apply CBRS data to 3.1, you don't have a pure equivalency. But you can trace to aspects of it where you can use portions of that again for your success. So I think part of the incentive is to be in that traceability matrix with a positive outcome. So historically, the next time you do something, you can pick and choose those things that'll work.
Okay, we have an online question, and this comes from Richard Bennett at High Tech Forum. The Pentagon is the largest user of Spectrum in the United States. What role can it play in training our Spectrum workforce?
Do you want to take that? Or?
I'll try. I mean, yeah, because I worked there. I think just based on the national strategy, it's starting to make us think differently. And how can we, again, grow the workforce? So I think it was like not directly in our face before, now it's in your face because we all experience resource shortages. So now we have to look at it differently. So I think everyone is trying to figure out, and funding is the key. All of these things are great, but where's the money going to come from to fund this process? So I think everyone is at the table. At least I can say up and down the Navy chain, we're trying to figure out how can we pursue it and sustain it and fund it. Or fund it, sustain it.
All right, with that, I think it's time to wrap up.
Alan?
Just given my 20 years of experience, that they have a significant role. I can't count the number of people that have come into the military through a career and have worked in Spectrum and then transitioned to other jobs, either in government or as a contractor going forward. And the Department of Defense has such a breadth of Spectrum experience because they have to operate globally, and it's so significant. I actually think they might be ahead of us in looking at the workforce because these issues came up there some time ago. They have to, as they look at their operational concepts for Spectrum, they're very significant, and so they have focused on joint electromagnetic spectrum operations for some time. And that requires a diverse workforce to help support that as well. So I think there's a lot to be learned, and maybe from the Department of Defense in terms of their lessons learned with regards to workforce development as well.
All right. I think, unless there are other questions in the room or online, now's a good time for us to thank our panelists. And we also want to thank the organizers of ISART for giving us this chance to share some of these perspectives. We look forward to continuing the conversation over lunch. Thank you.
All right, and speaking of lunch, we do have the same setup we have had the last 2 days. If you've prepaid, please feel free to take part. Please see the registration. Just that we have only 2 more opportunities to do networking. I want to specifically mention at 3:30 we will end the plenary conference, but we do have space for an hour and a half p.m. for networking and conversation. So please continue the discussions. That's a hallmark of ISART. We really appreciate that. There are going to be some refreshments out there this afternoon. So thank you and enjoy lunch.